like most people, I've been sitting around a lot and had quite a lot of free time recently. Obviously, COVID, nobody's working, and I have graduated university, what, must be 4 months ago now. And yeah, so just thinking, what have I learned and what have I been doing? And really, it's about time that I sort of put some of my ideas out there more, because you learn things as you go through university, you learn things as you go through A-levels and everything. And in this country, that's how it works. You go GCSEs, A-levels, university in most cases. And I think I had a slightly unique path through those three stages, and that sort of leads me to the position to be able to reflect on that and hopefully have some insight that isn't the standard whatever your teachers tell you, and isn't going to obviously conform to everybody's expectations, but that's the point. Everything is going to be, one, different from now on, and two, always has been different and always has been unique to the individual, and some things are more uniquely unique than others. So I think coming from a place where I have continuously thought about these things, and I have continuously, like I say, reflected on my experiences and gone through many different levels and sort of, in a way, life-changing things in this process, has allowed me to learn about learning, and that's what I want to go into. I have obviously no script. I obviously have no idea exactly what I'm going to say, but that's the beauty of this. That's the beauty of just being able to think on my feet, and hopefully that means that I'll be completely honest and won't be conforming to any sort of formality or anything that I think I should be saying. Okay, so I think I'll, in this one, mainly cover university, just because that's where I think it's, for me, was all concentrated, where my learning really took a step up from A-levels and things. And as I'll come on to, that's not to say that A-levels and GCSEs weren't extremely difficult and weren't insightful in their own way. It's just university is most recent and what I can most easily reflect on now. So I was probably always going to go down the science route, and I did end up doing physics at university. I went to Imperial College London, which is a science college and does math, science, business and medicine. So it's more of a sort of STEM place, less of the creative arty subjects, which was a shame for me, but that's for another time. So I did physics at university, and obviously that's very mathematically heavy, and that's what I have my expertise in, and that is to some extent what I enjoy doing. And I think that those sort of subjects do lend themselves to a more academic and sort of intense studying and work ethic in that sense, in the sense of sitting down and going through equations or going through whatever it is you need to learn. The STEM subjects require that, and that is what I did a lot. That's what I did it before university, and then going into my first year. For me, it wasn't this big change that everybody goes on about. It wasn't this sudden, you're thrown into being independent, you're thrown into living on your own, which you obviously are, but that wasn't a shock to me. That wasn't something that I had to particularly work hard to overcome, because one, I was always fine being independent, and that's more of a life skill than an academic university one. But also, I was fully aware that it was going to be hard work, of course, but anything is only as hard work as you put into it, is only as hard work as you choose to. There's whatever stage of work, academia, school you're at, there's going to be people that work less hard, and there's going to be people that work harder, and wherever you fit into that, to some extent, determines your outcome of your goals, your immediate goals, and to some extent your long-term goals. But it also, because it's such a long process, defines a lot of what you think about yourself and the way that you think and the way that you learn. So yeah, going into that, I had a very academic view of it, I knew that I could do it, for one, because I'd developed interest and ability to do maths, which is, like I say, most of physics. But of course, first year, either for most universities, doesn't count at all towards your degree, or counts very little. For me, it was very little, although that made no difference for me, and that is something I would want to get onto. Of course, freshers, yeah, it's fun. University first year is fun, but that's not where my mindset normally leads me down. It led me quite quickly back to the solid working and just carrying on as normal, of trying to work and study as much as possible, which is wrong, which is very, very taxing, and is something that culminated very later on in some very bad consequences, but that again is something that I'll talk about in a minute. So talking about that first year, going into those first year exams, I completely disregarded the fact that it didn't count for much. I worked incredibly hard. I think that may have been because it was a new setting, and university did to some extent, in that academic sense, feel like a new step, and felt like a big, it is a big institution, so it's something that you do want to try hard at if that's what you're going into it, if that's the mindset you're going into it with. So I did, and I worked, especially coming up to those first year exams, incredibly hard. I was getting up at 6 a.m. and going to bed at 12 p.m. and working most of that time, quickly getting up, go to the gym for half an hour, and then go straight into the library. As how boring that sounds, and as how the stereotype of that sort of person, that sort of university life, they aren't mutually exclusive. There isn't just somebody that studies hard and somebody who just goes out and parties, but that tends to be what people see. And of course, I was in the sort of study hard camp at that point. So that first year I got very close to burning out towards those last few exams. It's very hard to think back on it now. It was such a numb experience. It was such a just tunnel vision of working. So all I cared about and all I did was try to work more. Not better, not more effectively, just quantity of time. I wanted to work more, and that was a competitive thing. University, at least in these sort of areas, and like going to London, going to Imperial, tends to be very competitive. That is something that in academia and in schooling I had grown to know about myself. I am competitive like that, so I just wanted to work harder and longer than the next person, so I did, really. You have your own little room, so I was just either in the library or in my room, going through past paper after past paper, and then repeating them, and then going through more equations, and then doing endless Googling of different topics, because sometimes the notes weren't exactly what I wanted. And this isn't really about study skills, but that is something that you should definitely try and do, is get your learning from different places. So Google different notes, Google different equations and different sites. There's so many things out there, but also find different ways of the information being presented. So I sometimes couldn't really be bothered to read through page after page of words and equations, so I looked up some YouTube videos, which in the later years of university can be difficult because it's so niche and is quite high level, but in the first year you should be able to find some nice visual presentations or videos if that is how you learn. But yeah, experiment with different things. And that's what I did, lots and lots of it, and yeah, it paid off. And in that process, it's hard to describe unless you get to that point, but it is sort of a point. It is sort of another place that you get to in your mind, that you're working and all you think about is working, at least in my case, more. Some people it might manifest differently in their minds, but you also are happy you're doing it? However burnt out you are, as ever little mental energy you have, and sort of in a way crushed you feel, if that makes any sense, there's something in the back of your head that's proud of yourself for, at least for me, I was proud that I felt like that. I wanted to get to that point where I was burnt out, because then nobody could deny that I'd worked hard. You don't get burnt out by not doing any work. So that was sort of proof to myself that I'd really, really worked hard. And so there was that dichotomy of feeling terrible because you're just working. Nobody is designed to do that, or should do that, really. But there's also the other part of you that is feeling good that you've clearly been working at this level that covers all bases, really. There's nobody can nitpick and say, oh, you're at university now, you should be working this hard, or you've forgotten about this piece of homework, because you've done all the homeworks ages ago and you've gone on to find more homeworks or problem sheets from different universities or whatever it is. And I think that's almost another part of the feeling good about it, is that you feel accomplished and nobody can take that away from you. So that is probably takeaway number one. Don't always recognise when there's something at the back of your mind, being proud of yourself for that, because that is a dark, dark rabbit hole that did backfire for me, and it will only grow. It will only just keep on pushing you further and being more and more proud, because like anything, like people probably tell you all the time, learning like that and studying like that at that level is something you learn. Like you can see on my website, it's all about learning how to learn, but you also, without even thinking about it, get used to it, and then you get used to working harder and you get used to working longer, and it just grows and grows and grows. So at the start of first year, I was working the same as I did at A-level, so probably 9 a.m, do a few hours, have lunch, then wander into the library and do a few hours, and then go out in London or just whatever it is you want to do in the evenings. And then toward that just grew and grew, and then at the end of third year I was, like I say, 5 a.m, wake up, and then midnight going to bed. And as weird as it sounds, or as ingenuine as it sounds, as far as I can remember, most of my working day was spent studying. Actually, more recently I've sort of experimented to see if that was true, if I can still do it, and yeah, I can get up at 6 a.m. and go to bed at 12 midnight and have taken half an hour maximum of not sitting down and looking at equations. However, as I say, it doesn't necessarily affect studying, and I'm not endorsing this in any way, but that's what happened. Okay, so then skipping forward a bit to second year, everybody said it was going to be really difficult. It was, again, not as big of a shock as I thought it might be, because one, people had said that, and two, I'd already worked so stupidly hard in first year that I just carried on doing that, and it was pretty much the same. And for the most part, I was used to studying. Like, there was it was a lot of just exams, and after how many fucking years of exams I've done, I've learned how I can revise for exams, and it's just a matter of sitting there and doing the work. So second year was okay, and then third year. Third year counts for the most, at least when you're doing a 3-year course, obviously, and you have your degree project. For me, as a BSc project, which is a different sort of studying, a different sort of working than just revising for exams. So I think those two things are what started to throw me off. I can get into the details of all of what I had to do and what was happening, because there were other things happening at that time as well. But basically I got towards the exams, and I was just, like I said, gone down that rabbit hole of working too much, and it was starting to take a toll on probably the effectiveness of my studying. In some way, it was definitely negatively impacting the grades I was getting, I suppose, or to at least the way that I dealt with getting those grades, because sometimes, however clever, however much you work, and whatever stage you're at, whether it's key stage 3 or university or postgraduate, you're going to get things wrong, and there's going to be days where you get like 3 pieces of work back and you fail all of them or something, and that happened sometimes to me, and yeah, it feels horrible, but there's ways you can deal with it. And to mention one, and I'll mention others, of course, that's what this is about, but to mention one way of dealing with that, I just wrote those days off. If I started getting bad grades, I just tried to get all those bad things out of the way that day, and I just wrote that day off. And it doesn't fix everything, but at least if your mind works in that way, it can help you just compartmentalize and carry on. Because it really was just about carrying on studying. The only thing that I had to convince myself to do was carry on working, because I knew that once I got into that routine, you set into that sort of productivity thing. Everybody's been there. Everybody's been to, oh yeah, you get up in the morning, you go for a run, or you go to the gym, and then you feel really good, so you do some studying and it gets into a habit. So as long as you can get over some of those bad results, eventually you will get back into that routine. You'll feel great for a bit. Maybe another bad day will come and you'll get set back a bit. But when it's a 3-year degree or whatever it is, as long as it's not a deadline the next day, and that's another sort of mind state that you get into, as long as you've got time, that doesn't matter, because everybody else is having the same effects. Nobody, whatever it looks like, nobody is free of those days. Everybody has those days that they feel that they fail a lot of things, or some things, whatever it may be. Anyway, I'm rambling. So yes, 3rd year was the worst, and those 3rd year exams came up. The final exams counted for the most and was very daunting. And yeah, I think I had a panic attack, which is reasonable under those situations, or the situations I'd placed on myself, and that's not right. That's what I want to help people avoid. And then when I went to the doctors, or the university, college, nurse, or whatever it is, you speak to people because you're just struggling way too much. It was scary how okay they were with treating it. It was as if it was normal, and there was a massive waiting list to get any extra additional help after that. If you wanted to go on to doing CBT to help with stress or whatever it might be, it's a massive waiting list. That's not right. Nobody should have chosen a degree that they love to do. Nobody should have started studying something out of the passion for the subject and their passion to further that discipline, or at least contribute to it, or to at least expand their own mind, just 3 years ago, and then 1, 2, 3 years later have a complete mental breakdown because of any number of things, but in my case the competitive stress of it all. And there are always ways to avoid it that I've realised now, and as much as the individual can be blamed for, or maybe I could be blamed for putting those high stress situations on myself, or you can blame parents for placing too high expectations on you. In my view, it is the weird to say, the system that does it. Because if it was set up in a different way, that it was truly about what you want to study and about that passion you have, and wasn't about proving that you're the best at some science or the best at studying, then none of this would happen. So this is all for me to talk about another time, but the way that everything is set up inherently drives people to that. Whether it's driving people to the extent, like me, of mental burnout, or driving people away to the other end of things of just completely dismissing any sort of work ethic like that, or any academia that they might be interested in, because it's so institutionalized like that, and they just go off at school age or leave school, which is nearly always a positive thing, but it can always turn into a negative thing when you're left at home with nothing to do and you fall into bad habits or bad people, or it's the system basically. So yes, that third year was very difficult, and just to go back to that feeling of mental burnout, I would only describe it, I think, as helpless, or maybe at the time hopeless. It's very strange, and I just couldn't see that it didn't really matter, because obviously it didn't really matter. I was still going to have the benefit of all the work I'd done in the first 2 years and the third year leading up to that. So it was never the end of the world for my degree, but it felt like it, because I wasn't at all used to feeling like that or getting the grades that I started to get. So all this had come about from that great feeling of productivity. So I suppose I have to now think whether I would want to change that. And in all honesty, I don't think I would change it. That's the last thing I think I want to talk about. So that was a terrible experience. Yes, university was very stressful. University was, from looking at it now, boring. It wasn't a normal university experience because I didn't go out partying a lot, although of course I did. It was a STEM sciencey sort of environment, so it was just that just compounded the competitiveness of it. But also it was just intense, very intense. And again, I got to that point from that feeling of pride you get of working really hard, and nobody can take away that hard work feeling. People probably tell you that people say things like this to try and motivate you to work really hard, but I'm saying it because that can also be a downward spiral to working way too hard. But like I say, I really don't think I would change it now, as weird as that sounds, because you learn from it. I would never want to do it again because I've done it once, and now I know where that line is. I know that I'm capable of everything up to that point. So that's a really, really vital thing that I think I now know, and hopefully in some way can teach or just talk about more, is the fact that there is a point you get to that you can recognise that is just before that breakdown, that mental burnout that I keep saying. And it maybe it does take tipping over that edge to learn about it. And if it takes that for you, then maybe that's what you have to do. Like I say, this isn't going to be an easy thing, and studying at this level or doing anything at the level that, 18-hour days does to you is going to be easy. But is there a way of doing it without getting that to that point? Maybe there's not. But once you've got to that point, like now, I know where it is, and I can move on, and I still am sort of proud that I did it, because I can look back and think, or tell people about it like I can say now, and some part of me is still thinking, oh yeah, I worked really hard, that's great. Which is so stupid and fucked up, but it's true, and to some extent I'm proud of it, and to some extent I would never want to do it again, but I've learned from it. And if you want to really push the boundaries, then you're going to have to risk falling into that trap, and just be aware of it. Just, if you do get to that point, be aware that it doesn't matter. It really, really doesn't fucking matter. Like, I was stressing about the most sort of niche things in my BSc final project. I was stressing about not getting a piece of code written at 10 p.m. when I was out for a meal that I'd organised weeks before, and I was on my phone trying to text other people working on the project, because I was sort of running it, trying to get them to do the work, and obviously they're like, what are you talking about? Go have a meal. But that's not where my mind was at. So yeah, remember that there is a sort of mental switch that your brain can take, and that there's also two parts of that once that switch happens, your brain can take two paths simultaneously, or can influence you in two ways simultaneously. One in the negative, going towards mental burnout because you're working too hard, but in the other, feeding into that, feeding you towards more mental burnout by being proud of yourself because you've clearly worked hard. So just be careful of those things, and then if that gets too far, if that is feeding in too much, just try to remember it really doesn't matter, and every other person that has worked at that level will have felt the same thing. That is something that academia or university or school sort of lends itself to, the competitiveness of it. Nobody's going to want to show that they've been through that. Nobody's going to talk about it, because the whole point is that you've worked really hard and you're going to continue working hard. So if you said, oh no, I've had a mental breakdown and I don't know how I'm going to carry on working for these exams, then that's admitting defeat. And it sounds stupid, right? But that's the whole point. It does sound stupid when you're not in it, when you're not in that mental headspace. So just be careful of these things. And yeah, so that's a very, very brief overview of my university experience. That's not necessarily what this is all going to be about, but I just wanted to, there was something easy I can talk about and shows where I'm coming from. I've really, of all the things that I think I can sort of talk about, because I think everybody has a unique perspective. Everybody should be talking about what they've experienced, and this is what I've experienced. This is what I've learned. Lots of things. I've learned lots of things about studying. I've learned lots of things about how to learn, which is what my website is all about. And that's the practical side of things. But there's also the emotional, the mental side of things that I've just been speaking about. That there's lots more to it, and that's sort of what I know. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. But there's also the fact that studying, the things that I've done throughout school and everything, I've chosen the school route, I've chosen the university route, but that's just a microcosm of everything else that you can go down, and everything else that everybody's trying to do something. And up till now, I was trying to learn well, or however you want to put it. So, and these things that I'm talking about are, like I say, learning about learning, but also learning about life. I think learning about, as cliche as it is, university is about learning life skills, or just becoming more aware of how you're living. University doesn't always teach you that. University itself definitely didn't teach me that. I taught me that by the stress and the experiences I put myself through. So I think the age that you go to university is going to be very formative, but that's not it's not the way that people tell you that you're going to be taught career skills, you're going to be taught life skills by the university. It's normally yourself, and it's normally all self-imposed, and that's a good thing, because you want to learn from yourself about yourself, because you're the only one that knows about yourself, really, if that makes any sense at all. Okay, so yeah, I don't know if any of that made any sense, but it's the first thing I sort of wanted to talk about. It's the first thing I can talk about because I've been through it, and hopefully it's at least exposing the things that do happen and do go through people's minds, because I know I'm not the only one that's been through these sort of things. And it's really sometimes helpful to just understand that there's so many different routes and perspectives that you can take, and somebody else has been through either exactly the same or worse or slightly different than you. So don't worry about it. Don't get hooked up on the small little details of things. Cheers.